Philosophy, like religion, is supposed to set people free. It's supposed to be enabling. It's supposed to be empowering. And instead, what you see is a world full of people dragging their philosophies behind them like so many chains. You might even say they drag a trail of keys behind them, not knowing what to do with them, and therefore they are no better than chains. I've met people who live with these strange, thought-terminating cliches they've learned from philosophy, from moral philosophy, from ethical philosophy. And they're proud of these things. They're proud of these things they believe in. They're proud to share with you these things they believe in without ever having understood them themselves. Have you heard this? Whether you're vegan, non-vegan, sober, drunk, meat eater, slave owner, or otherwise. Hear this? Well, if you wouldn't do something yourself, you shouldn't pay someone else to do it. So when you're just talking about one narrow set of examples, if you wouldn't slit the throat of a cow yourself, if you wouldn't work on a factory farm yourself, work in a slaughter yourself, therefore it's immoral to pay someone else to do it. Let me tell you something, guys. I would not work as a lifeguard myself. I would not work as a lifeguard at a small swimming pool. I would not work as a lifeguard on the edge of the vast ocean. I would not work as a lifeguard who leaps out of a helicopter to rescue people from a sinking ship out in the high seas. I wouldn't do any of those fucking jobs. And neither would you. Okay, there's one guy in my audience who actually is a lifeguard and says, hey, I do that job. The vast majority of you also would not do that job. Do I think there's anything immoral with paying someone else to do that job? No. People live with this philosophy. They drag it along behind them like a chain, and they never even reason through counterexamples. They never criticize their own position, their own assumptions, their own beliefs, their own argument.
À-bas-le-ciel.
So buying meat from a grocer, right, from a grocery store, obviously supports animal cruelty. But eating someone's, like, chicken tenders that they were going to throw away, how is that a problem? I think it's a shame that someone who eats a vegan diet, avoids palm oil, but let's say they buy, like, I don't know, Maybelline foundation or something every few months, or they buy a pair of leather shoes every few years. They can't call themselves vegan.
There's a very broad assumption in philosophy that comes out of Immanuel Kant that anything you might desire to do yourself, you should stop and question whether or not it is permissible for anyone and everyone. So, you might like to think that it won't do any harm in the world if you seduce another man's wife and sleep with her. But then Kant asks you to stop and reflect. Do you want to live in a world in which everyone behaves this way? In which everyone and anyone feels empowered to go out and seduce and sleep with other men's wives? Well, you may offer some special pleading in your case. Well, they're married, but they're kind of estranged. They've been living in separate apartments for a few years. Well, you have whatever argument about your own, sir. Well, I don't think anyone's going to get their heart broken. I don't think it's really going to be so bad. No. From Immanuel Kant's perspective, either you embrace a world in which everyone commits adultery, or a world in which no one commits adultery, and then you apply this moral standard to yourself. Well, guess what? Not everyone can be a medical doctor. Not everyone should be a medical doctor. Not everyone can be a surgeon. Not everyone should be a surgeon. Not everyone can be a soldier or a sniper. Not everyone can even try. And tragically, not the topic of this video, not everyone can be a vegan. Yeah, I said it. Kristen Leo pretends to be a vegan. And she presents herself as a leader in the vegan movement here on social media, as an influencer. She buys leather She wears leather. She sells leather on the internet. She buys wool. She wears wool. She sells wool on the internet. Now, I do not know of an example of her buying fur, a fur coat, wearing fur and selling fur. But from a vegan perspective, these three examples are ethically interchangeable.
Lastly, I found my dream pair of shoes that I have been just curious about when they would come into my life, and it happened, and there are these cowgirl boots, which are so beautiful. I thrifted a pair of cowgirl boots like 5 years ago, and they broke within the first month because the leather was so worn, and since then I have been open and ready for my next pair to appear into my life. There is so much overconsumption shown online, but my relationship with clothing is fully just grounded. Like, I only buy things that I absolutely love. You can look up this brand online, the Stallion Boots and Belt Company. They fit perfectly, and I just love all of these little embroidered hearts, and it also has some silver embellished hearts on there as well. They're just so cool.
But she has put up the evidence on the internet for all to see of the extent to which she participates in and profits from and encourages others to participate and profit from both leather and wool. So tell me something, Kristen. Would you go to an animal rights protest wearing a fur coat? Would you go to a vegan event? Let's say you were invited to speak. I could imagine an outfit for you entirely of leather and wool, just based on the items you photographed yourself wearing and put on the internet. Would you go and stand at the podium wearing nothing but leather and wool? Would you wear a fur coat or any of these other things? When you're at an animal rights protest, when you're at an animal rights event, when you're speaking as a vegan leader at a special event for the vegan movement? And I suspect her answer is no. So tell me, are you a hypocrite? Do you believe in a world where you have one moral system, one set of ethical guidelines for when you are being perceived by your fellow vegans, and then a separate set of ethical guidelines when nobody's watching?
À-bas-le-ciel.
And then the internet was a big one, because the internet came along and I started watching those videos that a lot of them that PETA puts up of factory farming.
Oh,
and
terrible.
It's horrible. It's not just terrible. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. It's like, this is like human beings at their very worst. We've treated these things as like the most, I mean, not just as a commodity, but we've ignored their feelings and their thoughts and the fact that they have instincts and needs, and that we've stuffed them into these tiny little cages. It's a sickness.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Now, in the history of philosophy, this is not unprecedented. You guys may not know this, but ancient China, medieval China, pre-modern China, you find them stating quite bluntly and quite openly in writing, in written sources, that rape is a terrible crime, and adultery also is a terrible crime during conditions of peace. In peacetime, those are crimes. But in war, they're not. And war was quite frequent. I mean, it's intermittent, not quite constant, but there's war all the time. That the legal status and moral status of committing rape or committing adultery was totally different in wartime, in battlefield conditions, as opposed to in peacetime. And as you can imagine, there would be actual court cases dealing with this. But it's in literary sources, it's in written sources, it's referred to as something everyone understands in that culture, that everyone accepts. There's two different moral codes. Do you accept that? In pre-modern Thailand, again, I know this from a medieval written source about law, committing adultery was different if your husband was out of town. And it was different if your husband was out of town for a short time, or if your husband was out of town for several months. And it was different depending on the geography, how far away your husband was. Now, some people in the audience might feel that way, like, well, come on. You were out of town for 48 hours. What do you expect me to do? Some of you might say no. If you love someone, it doesn't matter if they're out of town for 48 hours or they're out of town for 2 weeks. You love them, you're committed to them, you're monogamous. Cheating is cheating, it doesn't matter. But some of you would say, 2 months? 2 months is a long time. 2,000 kilometers is a far distance. If your wife goes to visit her sister a 10-minute drive away and you cheat on her during that window of opportunity, that's different from your wife going to do humanitarian work, let's say in Syria or Ukraine right now, and she's away for several months. Some of you may feel that way, some of you not. So I'm asking the question, does this make you a hypocrite? Does it make you a hypocrite if you say there's one code of ethics for when you're publicly presenting yourself as a vegan at an animal rights march, at a vegan protest, and a different code of ethics in your private life, when there's no one there to judge you, when there's no one there to impose consequences on you, shame, humiliation on you, in plain English? Is there a different code of ethics for when you can get away from it? Right? Why does philosophy exist? I can even ask this about logic. Why do we reason? Why do we learn and practice thinking things through logically and studying and learning what it means to be reasonable in different contexts? Most people want to make out of the principles of philosophy a kind of jewelry, a way to embellish themselves, to declare to the world what a wonderful person they are. But that's not the purpose of philosophy. It's not the purpose of logic or reasoning. For every assertion you make, every gambit you take in your reasoning, you have to learn to reason against yourself, to criticize your own position, to expose your own assumptions, to think through impossible alternative things and contrast them to your own philosophy. So, in time, you come to discover how ridiculous and how laughable the assumptions you once had truly are.